a time of fear. Fear is broadcast on the television, printed in the papers. It's on your Facebook feed. It's seeping between the lines on Instagram. It's all over the podcast sphere. Fear is what you talk about at the grocery store with acquaintances, or near the trash cans with your neighbors, or over dinner with friends. Most of us are carrying extra weight in our pockets like heavy hearts into dimming days, that weight of fear. Fear is big business. There are a tremendous amount of people out there who are getting rich and powerful on our fears. Even so, we can't help ourselves. Some of us fear that immigrants are taking over the American way of life. Others are fearful that the way we treat immigrants is demeaning the soul of our country. Some fear that our way of life is being undermined by a laissez-faire approach to gender and sexuality, while others fear that narrowly imposed norms will cause harm to those they love. Some fear that free speech is being undermined by mainstream media. Others fear that free speech has been hollowed out by government decree. There is fear to go around, no matter who you are or what you believe. But no matter what you fear, here we are in Advent, and here on the first Sunday, we light this candle of hope, the small flickering flame in that world of gathering dark and coldness. Now, my guess is most of us have spent far more time this year rehearsing what frightens us than naming what gives us hope. Hope feels, at best, sometimes like a lacy luxury, something for quieter times or times past. Listen to how our gospel begins. In the days of King Herod. Herod, famous for his paranoia, his surveillance, his brutality. The point here is, as we enter this season, we enter into a season that is certainly hallmarked by that time of Jesus, a very troubled era. Jesus entered the world, luminous, stubborn, unquenchable hope, even in that time of Herod. And both of today's scriptures tell us, do not fear. Lovely words, soothing words, but how? How are we to silence our fears? Fear, after all, is an adaptive response. It helps us to stay alive at times. So I'd suggest perhaps what we're not to do is suppress our fears, but to face into them and to name them honestly, to hold them up a little bit to the light of God's presence, to view them with curiosity, to be frank about them, to become more acquainted with their shape and their size, rather than just lugging them around unthinkingly, rather than just amplifying them by sharing them complainingly and unthinkingly. What if we did some work with our fears in the presence of God? What if we spent some time talking to them instead of letting them just blare into our lives? Our Advent theme for this whole season is, what do you fear? Not an order, but a question asking us to take some curiosity to our fear, not to indulge, but to speak to it, not to let unspoken fears rule us or overspoken fears overwhelm us, rather to meet our fears with grace. We name this form of darkness, so it will not overwhelm us. I know when I do this, my fears become tameable. Often when I'm afraid, I'll start by praying, save me from, don't let this happen. Do not allow this misfortune to befall me. And then they start shifting to something more like, don't make me suffer. Don't make those I love suffer. Maybe make us suffer only enough. Help us to manage. Maybe we can find our way through. Give us strength to allow me to endure. Give me the wisdom to endure. So after a time, I find myself praying in a way that has shifted away from hide me from my fears to I, in your presence, God, have the capacity to live with hope, even though I have fear. Can we acknowledge our fears without letting them rule us? Might we catalyze our own fears as an impetus to love, as a willingness to act in this world? Might we discover that we no longer need to own the fears in such a tight way that they do not need to captivate all of our attention? Might we discover that there are actually angel voices in our fears, and that that is the very inbreaking of hope in our midst? Elizabeth and her husband are old and childless, at a time in which for women being childless is to be deemed of no value. And this was the time of Herod, not a cushy time to raise a child as a Jew in an occupied country. And yet, children force us to hope, do they not? Certainly, as we raise children, there are lots of thoughts of fear, as certainly any mother or father can tell us, any grandparent, any aunt, uncle, or neighbor. But as we watch children grow, we must live into their hopes. And so God shows us that God is up to something new already in today's scripture. Even before we hear Joseph and Mary, God is up to something new, proving that God has the capacity to generate hope in our lives, even when there is much to fear. And perhaps this is the angle we want to take as we listen to those angel voices of do not fear. Maybe this is less a command to manage our anxiety and more a plea to not put the weight of all of our fears into the world so heavily, into the lives of the next generation. God is about to bring forth something new, and it needs room, and we can help that room to be created by managing our fears, by not letting them overwhelm us. Room to gurgle a new language, a new imagination of what is possible, what is joyful, what is hopeful. So this little light today reminds us that we can dare to believe, that hope can be born in the time of Herod. Hope can be born even in the face of what might terrify us. God still comes, unexpectedly, luminously, asking us to loosen our grip on fear for long enough for the Christ light to take hold in the quiet gloaming and to glow.